United States Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York. Senator, always good to talk to you.
Good morning. Good to be back.
We'll just throw the softball over the center of the plate for the first pitch, and then follow up with maybe some of the pitches that your Yankees have had trouble hitting of late. The Red Sox are hitting out of the park. Oh, I'm sorry. I can help myself.
Go Yankees.
But here's a pitch straight over the plate that David Price might pitch to you, which is, what do you think about the pick? What do you think about Judge Kavanaugh?
Well, look, President Trump is fulfilling his campaign promises with the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh. He said in his campaign he would repeal Roe. He would send it back to the states. And he said in his campaign he would repeal ACA with things very precious to the American people, like maintaining pre-existing conditions. And he has now accomplished that. He's had two groups vet these nominees. One is the Federalist Society, run by Leonard Leo.
Right.
Leonard Leo has dedicated his life to repealing Roe. And it is a certainty that anyone on that list will vote to repeal Roe. We have the Heritage Foundation, which have dedicated their existence.
Can I just stop you on that for 1 second?
Well, I'd like to finish my... Okay,
no,
sure.
But I just want to go point by point. You can't really say it's a certainty, can you, that Brett Kavanaugh will overturn Roe? And certainly most of us would have said it was a certainty that Justice Roberts would overturn the Affordable Care Act. You never know exactly how those we Republicans, or as a former Republican, I find you never know which direction they're going to go.
Well, look, I sure wouldn't take a bet on Leonard Leo's hand-picked list to keep Roe, for sure. And the other one is the Heritage Foundation. They have dedicated their existence to repealing ACA, pulling the government out of health care. The president promised that in his campaign as well. So these are two issues broadly popular with the American people: women's reproductive rights, keeping health care, particularly pre-existing conditions. I will oppose this nominee with everything I've got. And I'd make one other point, particularly for you guys, which is this. You are worried about President Trump's overreach. So am I. This nominee has stood more, certainly before he became a judge, for presidential overreach. He has said the president shouldn't be investigated. He's gone so far as to say a president, if he declares a law unconstitutional, doesn't have to obey it. How is he going to react if Mueller needs a subpoena, if Mueller needs some other action? So for all these reasons, this man should not be on the bench. And I believe if we can prove these 2 points to the American people, that he will repeal Roe and women's reproductive freedom, that he will repeal ACA and the right to pre-existing conditions, or the right to protect pre-existing conditions, that we will get a majority in the Senate to vote against him. I know it's an uphill fight, but they said we couldn't do it with health care, and we did.
I understand that, and isn't it also fair to say, Senator, that this nominee is here because Democrats lost the election? Voters in 2016, they were looking for conservative judges, and they worked toward this. Republicans got what they want, they won, and here we are. I guess my question is, what fight do you really fight? Do we look toward the midterms and try and find a message and try and find a unifying set of leaders? Or are we going to fight an impossible fight right now because Democrats lost?
I don't believe it's an impossible fight. They said that with ACA. I believe that if the American people rise up, and we've seen lots of that in the last few days, we can win this fight. And I'd make one other point. The number one issue for our party, from the red states to the purple states to the blue states, is health care, and particularly pre-existing conditions, protecting them, which is wildly popular and necessary in the reddest of states. This court battle highlights that. And so this actually may help us in the midterms. Anytime health care is highlighted, Democrats win.
Senator, your task right now seems to be centered around trying to defeat this nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the court. So how do you balance that fight with the idea of keeping Tester, Manchin, Donnelly, Heitkamp in the United States Senate? How do you balance that?
Well, as I said, in those states, health care is a very important issue, as it is in Maine, as it is in Alaska. Obviously, we can't win this fight unless we get a Republican. But I do believe, if the American people come to believe this court would overturn women's reproductive freedom and the ACA, we will get a majority of votes. Obviously, it would have to be from both parties.
Senator Schumer, it's Willie Geist. Do you believe that Judge Kavanaugh is an extremist?
I believe he is far, far right on so many issues. The ones I've mentioned, and particularly alarming, is, of course, the one about presidential power at a time when we have a president who just routinely overreaches and doesn't respect rule of law. But I also, on gun rights, on environmental rights, on LGBTQ rights, he is way, way, way to the right of the American people. He is not a mainstream judge, and that's why the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, groups that are not in the mainstream, have chosen him, have pre-selected him. Had Donald Trump chosen someone from off the list, which I urged him to do when he called me, we might be in a different situation. But the fact that the president campaigned on these things and created his own litmus tests, and then the fact that he let two groups that vehemently, strongly, fervently believe in these two things makes it pretty clear that this is an extreme nominee.
Senator, do you believe that President Trump selected Judge Kavanaugh because of Judge Kavanaugh's views on presidential power and his position in that law review paper where he said that presidents should not be subject to prosecution while in office?
I certainly believe he was the judge probably of the 25. They all would repeal Roe. They all would repeal ACA. But on this issue, the Mueller issue, which came up after the vetting by these two groups, he's probably the most extreme. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was very important to Donald Trump, knowing Donald Trump, and I have no proof. Do you think he didn't inquire about this either directly or indirectly, knowing Donald Trump? What do you think?
That's what
I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, I totally hear you.
So this idea of my dear friend Joe that he's a moderate, on the issue you care most about, he's not even close to a moderate.
Well, first of all, I never said he was a moderate.
I know.
Sometimes you never know. He was pointing to Roberts.
I know. No.
Wait,
I'm just trying to push you over a little, Joe.
You were trying to push a little bit. I shouldn't have said what I said about the Yankees.
Yeah.
No, all I'm saying is I'm just warning everybody again. Republicans, as a former Republican, I can tell you I spent a generation being surprised by what justices that were painted as right-wing lunatics ended up doing once Sandra Day O'Connor or Souter or Justice Kennedy came in
but
there.
you have the opposite. You have judges who said they'd call balls and strikes like Judge Roberts, who led his court to create Citizens United, probably the worst decision in a generation, letting dark money flow into politics.
He also upheld the Affordable Care Act
on a very narrow basis, which now that we have the mandate law changed, I don't think he'll stick with that either. So I don't think Judge Roberts has called balls and strikes. I certainly don't think Judge Gorsuch has called balls and strikes. If anything, these justices have been far more to the right on the bench than they talked about in their hearings.
I'm going to call a timeout right now because I want to know if you want to hang around and listen. The president just left the White House. He's heading to the NATO summit, and he made a few comments. They're a couple minutes long. Senator, do you want to stay and listen with us?
And respond?
All right, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's President.
Here we go. Here's the president. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.